Do you struggle with self-doubt? With that harsh voice that tells you you're not enough, you're not ready, you're not worthy? Me too. I honestly think every human being does. At one point in my life, I thought maybe there would be a day when I would arrive when all of my self-talk would just be beautiful, flowery language of encouragement. But now, at my advanced stage of 36, I've realized that maybe that inner critic voice will never fully go away, and that's okay. But there are a lot of things I can do to quiet the voice down and make sure it's not the one that's making decisions for me and sitting in the driver's seat of my life. One of those things, as I found out from this conversation you're about to hear, is empathy. Yeah, self-empathy is a thing. So we're going to get into empathy for others, empathy for ourselves, and where it intersects with our creativity. Stay tuned for this episode. You're not going to want to miss it. Welcome to Unleash Your Inner Creative with Lauren LoGrasso, my sweet creative cutie. I'm Lauren LoGrasso. I'm an award-winning podcast host and producer, singer-songwriter, public speaker, and creative coach. This show is meant to give you tools to love, trust, and know yourself enough to claim your birthright to creativity and pursue whatever dream or goal is on your heart. And today's guest is Mimi Nicklin. Mimi is the internationally best-selling author of Softening the Edge, the founder of the world's first organizational empathy platform, empathyeverywhere.co, and the host of the top-rated podcast, Mimi You Show. She's also a globally recognized speaker and coach who's leading a movement to bring empathy back to the center of leadership, performance, and purpose. I wanted to have Mimi on the show because of the way she talks about empathy, which is as a bold, actionable skill. I personally am really sick of people talking about things like empathy or creativity as being quote unquote soft skills. They're actually some of the hardest skills you can have and the most important ones for not only living a better life, but also for financial viability in the future. And Mimi and I are so aligned on that. Empathy is something we all need right now, especially if you're a creative who's trying to quiet your inner critic, push past fear, and show up fully in your work and life. From today's conversation, you'll learn how empathy fuels creativity and innovation, the difference between self-awareness and self-empathy, simple ways to bring more empathy into your work and relationships, and why creating community and connection matters now more than ever. Okay, now here she is, Mimi Nicklin. Mimi, I am so excited and honored to have you on Unleash Your Inner Creative. Welcome to the show.
I feel like I have been waiting for months. Lauren, I am really extremely excited to be here to have this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, my honor. Yeah, we have been waiting for months, but worth the wait, you know? Honestly, I've just been like thinking about your story and all of the amazing things you share. And I'm so excited because you mentioned before we got into this, but there's actually a lot of overlap between empathy and creativity.
So much. When, our friend that introduced us showed me your work for the first time, I felt exactly that. I thought, we're like two sides of a coin, like yin and yang, or not even yin and yang, maybe yin and yin.
Yeah.
Because yes, I share so much of your passion for the role of creativity. And of course, I mean, at least from my point of view, but I'm sure many of your listeners share it, you can't have a lot of creativity without empathy, because if you don't understand things, how can you be creative around them, right? So yeah, I definitely feel like there's a really good tie between these two things.
Oh yeah, 100%. You were even talking about the connection between empathy and innovation. And I was like, yes, because I always talk about taking a holistic approach just to life in general, but on this show, creativity. And I love that that's where you come from with your work.
Yeah, I think so. And funnily enough, like I always believe, Lauren, that the world puts things in the right time frame.
Yeah.
Right. And just yesterday, I did a second session for a client, like a masterclass, like a workshop online. And they are a creative agency. And even though I come from like 16 years of creative agencies, so doing creative work and living in the land of creative ideas, it wasn't until this week that I had to really discipline myself to write up what I thought, because I was teaching someone, so that kind of moment. And I find that all the time in my work, something has to kind of prompt me to put it on paper, because otherwise it kind of stays in your heart or your mind. But I was training this agency and they asked me to very explicitly look at the connection between empathy and the creative industry. So winning business, converting pitches, retaining clients. So literally yesterday we spent 2 hours, and it's endless, Lauren, actually, those connection points between higher levels of empathy and therefore better relationships and higher levels of creativity. It's like linear. So perfect timing for this conversation.
Okay, well, that is so cool. And thank you, universe, for gifting us this day
Exactly.
together. Do you or would you feel comfortable sharing any of the through lines you found?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think, look, fundamentally, my work in empathy is about humans, right? It's about relationships. It's about understanding. So maybe we just very quickly start with what empathy is, and then
Yes.
I'll tell you what that is, right?
Love it. Let's define it.
Because yeah, let's define it. Because everyone listening, I'm sure you all have a definition, and I always say to my audiences, there is no wrong definition, right? It's not a test. But from my point of view, empathy is perspective taking, right? It is the ability to understand the perspective or the opinion or the mindset of somebody else. It's not about emotions. It can be, but fundamentally, the skill set that sits in the prefrontal cortex of your brain, you were born with it, is fundamentally about the ability to take the perspective of somebody else. So when I was looking at the creative industries, and this agency were really keen to look at things like retention and loyalty, because the creative industries are, well, AI has shifted things, and they're more competitive than ever before. And I think they're less human than ever before. I mean, like a little bit of my story, a very small bit, but my dad was an ad man, right? So Lauren, did you ever watch Mad Men on Netflix?
Of course.
Obviously,
It's what got me to try my first cigarette, but I've only done 2 in my life. But one was after watching Mad Men, and I'd been dreaming about smoking. I literally, it was like 23, had never tried a cigarette, and I was like, I have to smoke. So I tried one, and then I threw up the whole next day. So anyway, yes, I've watched it.
So that reality was like literally my dad's life. You think, I mean, I'm sure it's a little bit dramatized, but I watched it with him once, and I was like, can you tell me? And he's like in his 70s at that point. Like, is this real? Did you really drink whiskey at like 11 a.m. like at the Ritz in London? He was like, yeah. So anyway, I go off track. So my dad was an ad man, so I grew up wanting to be in advertising, which is quite a rare thing. Most people sort of fall into the creative industries, or at least the sort of commercial side of it. But for me, that was my dream from like 12 years old. And I spent most of my career there before I kind of shifted my focus. And the point of that story is to say that it was a very high and very intense, right? It still is probably, but slightly differently now. Very high intensity, high energy, high human industry. When I sat with this team yesterday for the session, but in the run up for it with their HR leaders, it struck me so much how transactional the creative industries have become. And, you could see it over the last, I guess, decade. But most of their questions are about financial negotiation and managing procurement. And, one of them finally put it in the chat box, and I was like, thank gosh someone said it, which is they spend so much time putting down their clients, saying, oh, they don't know what they're doing, they're stupid, they're irritating. It's become so transactional. So when you say what was the kind of through line for the webinar, for me it was quite simple, I guess. It was saying, if you have better relationships, right? If you can make your relationships with your client just more enjoyable at the very simplest, you are going to grow. Because people like to spend time with people who like people, right? So,
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the premise. There's loads of data points and stuff, but fundamentally, it's about reminding people that we're all humans.
I don't even know where to start because I have so many follow-up questions from that. That's brilliant. And I've seen it too. Like, I don't think you could have been in the workforce for the last decade and not see what's happened. So many creative companies have gone from being creative companies to running like a spreadsheet. And it's really disheartening to see a place that was once a thriving, breathing, working together organism go into like, I don't know, just gray out. It's really, really sad. And I think that makes so much sense. I heard a statistic you said on another podcast I listened to where you said like empathy has gone down by 48% in the past 3 decades. Do you
Yeah.
attribute that to technology? Like, what are some of the reasons for it?
Yeah, I don't attribute it to technology. I think that tech has a role, social media has a role, and that is like people's favorite demons, right? They want it to be because of that, because it makes them feel better. You know, I heard this morning, Lauren, Goldman Sachs talking about 330 million people who are going to lose their jobs to AI, right? Which is, of course, half the story, because some of them will lose their jobs to AI, but AI will create new jobs. So some of them will just get new jobs, right? So people love to demonize the world of technology and what's going on. But did that kill our empathy? No, we did. Right? So there's many parts of it. Urbanization, right? So the fact that so many of us, and we're talking over 30, 40, 50 years, have moved to cities, right? We've left our hometowns where we kind of came from. Globalization, you know, in most teams now around the world, you have people from all around the world. You know, if you go to somewhere like Singapore or Dubai, which is the side of the world I live on, you can quite easily have 19 or 20 nationalities in a team, right? In the same office, not even across borders, but actually sitting together. Technology, yes. Technology in some ways has disconnected us because, of course, you can sit on a metro and never look up from your phone, right? Never make any human connection. But at the same time, you and I can hang out on what is, for me, a Friday morning and, you know, start the day with my coffee and Lauren, and we've never met. And perhaps, I mean, hopefully not, but perhaps we'll never meet in real life, right? So technology also connects us. So there's a lot of shifts around here. Fundamentally, we are lonelier now than we have ever been at any point in history. In fact, the statistics will show you that 52% of us are lonely. That's a lot of lonely people.
Yeah.
So there's a big part of this, what we call empathy deficit, this lack of understanding of each other in the world. And, you know, we need to turn it around fundamentally.
Well, I like that because it's a much more empowering view than just being like, well, it's not our fault. Like, we are just like, just following technology and we're all addicted.
No.
And so I like that because it puts some accountability, but also
Yes.
empowerment back in the hands of people. It's really,
Yeah.
it's nice to hear.
We can fix it.
Yes, that's wonderful.
We can.
And I want to get into that. Like, what are some ways you've seen, proven ways in people that you can begin to build empathy?
My favorite one is so simple. My favorite one is just to use people's names.
Yes.
I've realized in this journey, Lauren, that we have to really break this down, which is why my definition is also super simple, right? Perspective taking. That's it. Like, that's the only thing you have to remember. Because we're failing so much in our human connection, in empathy for all the people out there, all your listeners, everyone I ever get to talk to, in empathy for the world they are living and working in. Let's not give them a framework. I know HR wants a framework, right? But people don't really want a framework. Maybe they do if they're going through a process. But if we're trying to really shift behavior at the point of life, am I going to sit, you know, in the coffee shop when I order my coffee and think, now, what did Mimi tell me the step one was to be more empathetic? No, right? So we need to make it super simple. And my favorite one is to use people's names, which, of course, in the hospitality industry, the service industry, most people have name tags, right? So, I mean, at least they do here. Do they still have name tags in America?
Yeah, a lot of them do.
Yeah, right. So, you know, there's a really simple way to just start practicing connecting as humans, right? Using people's names. I think probably naturally, if we look back at the last 12 minutes of recording, I've probably said your name a couple of times. You know, it's just part of who I am. I will throughout the show. Your name is the first gift you were ever given. And when you use people's names, you shift the wiring in the brain a little, well, the way that the wires fire in the brain, right? And it works with children, and it works in the service industry, and it works in your teams. So the easiest, simplest step is to start using people's names. The second bit, which we can or don't need to talk about, but if we want to, is to listen better. Because fundamentally, if you want to understand other people, whether that's for creative purposes or whether that's for, you know, connection purposes, relationships, you have to listen. Because if you don't listen, how will you understand, right? Listening is the backbone. Listening is the backbone to everything, but certainly to empathy. So a lot of my work is in not even teaching people, just reminding people how to listen better.
Yes, I love that. So those are two really simple things. However, I always thought I was an amazing listener, okay? I've been given this accolade throughout the course of my life. I host a podcast. I have been told I'm a great listener. When I started dating Tim, he was like, "You don't listen to me." And I was like,
Oh no.
this is feedback I have never gotten. And what I found out was that we had different definitions of what listening is. So to me, listening was just retaining information. Like I could, if he said like 15 things to me, I could spit back the entire list and I had listened, okay? In my head. What he meant by listening was seeing him, holding space, taking him in and giving him the space he needed to like share his story, because he doesn't work at the same clip I do. I'm very quick, I'm clipping along. I've got like some Sicilian fire in me. He moves at a slower pace, needs more time to process and needs more time to share. So I guess I would ask you, like, what is your definition of listening in terms of empathy? We can sometimes even have different definitions of that.
We can. And you know what's super interesting about your story is that the other day I did a session with some female entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia. And so we were in Sri Lanka specifically, and they are in like an entrepreneur's incubator, right? These women. And we did this masterclass on listening and how to use listening to build your business and that type of thing. And at the end, we had open discussion. So there's maybe 18 women or 20 women. And very quickly, the conversation came to your story, right? But can we talk about listening with our husbands and in our relationships? And many of these women are Muslims, and many of them have arranged marriages, which is a very positive experience for anyone listening who doesn't know much about them, right? There's a bit of a misunderstanding of that. But these women are very happily married to men that their families introduced them to years ago. But what that means is that you fundamentally marry into a new family that you don't really know, because the families choose on different levels of criteria, which tends to be extremely successful. But being able to listen, like you just said beautifully then, Lauren, means really different things to different people. And there was this one woman, she was probably maybe early 30s. She told this story to the group, and it was very similar to yours. She said, we had this marriage, we were very happy. By this time, they have 2 or 3 children. And it's really not going well, this marriage. But she doesn't want the marriage to break. And culturally and from a culturally religious context, right? That's not something she wanted to break, this very important family bond. And so she said she had to sit down with her husband and have this exact conversation and say, listen, we need to talk about what listening means to you, what it means to me, and more importantly, how we practice it. So therefore, how does it look, right? So I tell that story because I think the answer to your question is less about my definition versus your definition and more about how you live that listening experience. So I'm going to answer it that way, Lauren, and say that there are a couple of signals that really define what listening is. And the first thing is to understand that listening and hearing are 2 very different things. So perhaps I'm making an assumption, but perhaps what you might have been doing at other points in your life is hearing things really well, right? Because you were multitasking, you're doing things. Like you said, you could repeat back the list. If someone said, what did I just say? You said, oh, we need to go to the grocery store and buy tortillas, right?
Yeah.
You heard them. But actually, most of the time, and this is the reality, most of the time, we're listening to ourselves, right? So for anyone listening, if you imagine sitting in a meeting, for example, at work or on a Zoom call, and someone in that meeting is saying, we're going to need to move the deadline because we can't do this and we have to move the photo shoot. In your head, you're thinking, no, we can't do that because I don't have enough time for this. And then I'm going to have to call the photographer and all this stuff is going on, right? You can hear them, but you're listening to yourself, right? So the key thing to understand about listening is that hearing is passive. Listening is active. And therefore, regardless of kind of what you think listening is and what your husband thinks listening is as a definition, the most important thing is to show activity, right? In that really kind of intentional listening. So things like eye contact, things like using people's names, things like smiling even, things like nodding, little noises you can make like, mm-hmm. And that doesn't matter what language you speak or what culture it is. Signals that show people, often subconsciously, that you are with them. So you can listen to be in agreement. You can listen to be in disagreement. But the best form of listening is to be with, just to be with them. So yeah, there's many kind of ways to learn it, but that would be how I describe it.
I love that. Be with them.
Be with them, right?
Yes.
Isn't that nice?
It's so nice. It feels very comforting to think about. Yeah, it's amazing too, because when Tim pointed that out to me, I was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. It took me like months to even be like, okay, he's got a point. And then now that I really have changed the way I listen and sit with him, it has caused me to have different standards of what listening is. And I realize, and I love my family of origin so much. You know, I come from a big Italian-American family. We're very close. But this is a family pattern. This is a cultural thing within my family where we kind of like all talk over each other all the time. And we think we're listening, and there's a lot of love and a lot of respect. But like half the time, my parents don't hear what I say, you know? And so it was like, wow, it's amazing when somebody makes you, when somebody invites you to shift your standards for them, you know, to give them something they need. It also shifts and increases your standards for yourself. Because now I need more out of a
because you're conscious
relationship
of it, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, you know, nearly always the lack of listening, like as soon as you said I'm from this big Italian family, like I was like, yeah. Like I know I have friends in those families, right? The noise, the chat, the, like you said, the love, the passion, right? Around those tables and meals and stuff. It's well intentioned. Nobody around that table in your family or any other family is not listening because they don't love you or because they're not interested in you. They do love you and they are interested in you, but in their intent to help you grow, to give you inspiration, to answer your problems or your challenges, people talk, right? So as you said, it's not until you really bring awareness to someone and say, but actually there's a huge power in acknowledgement over action. Right? People generally, Lauren, whether it's your family, your best friend, somebody at work, they don't need you to fix. They just need you to listen. And if you look at the life coaching industry and the huge growth, right, in coaching, I think $1 trillion by 2030 is the prediction. Wow. People are so desperate to be heard, they are paying people to listen to them, right? And I can't say that that's all bad. There's not loads of bad people out there, right? It's not that people don't want to listen. It's just we don't teach it, right? We tell people to listen, right? We say to our children, listen to mommy, listen to daddy, listen to teacher. I tell you to listen better. But who's teaching us to listen better? Because this is a skill set. So you're right. Sometimes when you're aware of your own standards in that way, it shifts how you see things. But we have to bring everyone with us because there's just simply not awareness around this. And sometimes, Laura, when I do my like workshops and stuff, in the first coffee break, somebody always, normally a man, will come to me and say, Mimi, I just realized I haven't listened to anyone in my whole life.
Well, hey, that's self-aware.
Yeah, and then I always say to them, don't worry, you're not alone. Because people, until you bring like awareness to this, they're like, oh, I thought I was listening, but I don't think I was. I was like, it's okay. Most of us aren't. So it is about awareness. I think that's a really big part of it.
And I love something else you said earlier, because it also, again, aligns with what I talk about with creativity. And that is something that empathy is something we just have to remember. I heard you again say on another podcast, 98% of us are born with empathy and like the ability to be empathetic. The same thing with creativity. A NASA study found that 98% of us are born creative geniuses.
Oh, I love
But
that.
by the time they followed this group of kids, and so by the time those same kids, the 5-year-olds, turned 31, the numbers had flipped. So it was only 2% creative genius, 98% not. So that is literally something I say in my keynote, that creativity isn't something you need to invent or conjure. It's just something you need to remember. Why is empathy the same? How does it get knocked out of us, and how do we start to call it back?
I paused because I was just reflecting on your sentence, because I love that you said that, because I say pretty much the same sentence as you mentioned there. I mean, my favorite thing to say at the moment, for sure, is that this is not a concept, it's a memory. You were born with this. And I only started saying that about maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And when I discovered that sentence, it came to me on an aeroplane. Everything comes to me on an aeroplane.
The
Even
best.
your podcast stuff you were saying comes from some trip on Delta, right? The
Yeah.
power of air flights. But when I had this sort of realization, exactly to your point, that this is not, again, I'm not teaching a framework. This is not like some newfangled corporate something. It's just about remembering what we were born with. When 2 babies are born equally sick, the one that gets more empathy outlives the other. Empathy is an evolutionary skill set. Like I mentioned earlier, it's built into your brain, right? It is there to ensure the survival of the human race. Not just thriving, you will thrive, right? If you use this more often in your relationships, your workplace, you'll get promoted quicker, all kinds of great things happen, right? But fundamentally, we're talking about the survival of the human race. And as you touched on earlier, we have 3 decades of decline of this human ability to connect to other people. So if you think of us as cavemen and women in, tribal times, when we lived in forests and mountain ranges and stuff, we knew that if someone got disconnected from the group, if they left the group, either they died or we did. We knew that. We knew that we have to be together to do well. If you ask our children, they know this. Like to your point there around the NASA research, right? We are born with these things and then we forget them. So there's this video clip that I use of my own daughter. She's 7. Her name is Umi. And in this video clip, I'm recording some content at home, and she came home and in her 7-year-old way said, why do you get to be on camera and I don't? So I was like, sure, come. So she comes and she joins me. The camera's rolling, so she comes. You can see in this video, like, her hair's messy. She's not, like, it's not pre-planned. And I say to her, what should we talk about? And of course she says, empathy, mummy. I'm like, yeah, well trained. So I ask her what listening is, and she tells me. And then I say to her, Umi, what happens if I don't listen to you? And she thinks. And she says, Mummy, if you don't listen, I think that you don't care and you don't want to be my friend. She knows. We know, right? We know that when we're not listened to, you don't attribute any value to me, right? And then all of the work you do in kind of finding confidence and finding your purpose and all those types of wonderful things that you talk about, you can't get there if no one's listening, because your brain, yourself, you'll be full of, am I not good enough? Why is no one talking to me? Why does no one want to come and speak to me in the coffee break? Maybe I don't fit in. All of that self-rhetoric, right? We need to be heard. It is fundamental to our survival, but just also to us, to growth, right? And one of the things, that's really important to remember is that we're all more alike than we are different. So the media loves to pull us apart because it, sells ads. But in the end, this is human. It doesn't matter where you come from, what language you speak, what background you come from. Being connected is to be human.
I love that. I heard you say it sells ads, and being that you Mimi, are an ad professional, you watch your dad do it all your life. I'm just curious, like, the thing I've been asking myself a lot lately, seeing the state of the world and how many people do really seem to think they're completely different from the person living right next door to them, and therefore have contempt for each other. I keep asking the question, could we do it differently? Could it be different? With ads, let's just take one thing. Could they do it differently? Could that be done differently? Could it be done from a heart-centered place instead of a place that puts people at odds and at lack?
Yeah, of course, like 1,000,000%. Of course it can, right? To your first question, can we do it differently? Yes. And can advertisers? Yes. But I think the biggest challenge, and the more I think about this, is speed, right? We are all totally obsessed with winning now, right? Like, let's pretend I am Sarah Jane and I decide to start sarahjanespodcast.com today. Tomorrow, I want to be number one. Tomorrow, I want 10,000 downloads, right? And we're so desperate to win so fast that we will pay anybody or anything, whether that's, AI mechanics, or we buy followers, or we buy ads to buy us followers in order to achieve that. To not subscribe to that, which is what I'm trying, right, Lauren? I try to do this, is hard and gets harder the more successful you become, right? Because the more successful you become, the more successful people think you should become. So I actually wrote about this last week, which is, when did we become totally obsessed? When did we run our lives by the word scale, particularly in America, right? I'm not American, so this is an outsider point of view. But when I speak to anyone in my American ecosystem, which I'm growing, their first question is, so how are you going to scale? I'm like, well, I wasn't planning on scaling, right? I want to create more impact, but I don't really want a 500-person organization or even a 30-person organization, right? So I think our world is obsessed with fast growth. And my opinion on why that is because there's so much insecurity, because the world is so difficult, and because every day something else happens. And because we have 24/7 media, now we watch it. So it doesn't matter if it's in my hometown or my state or a war zone on the other side of the world, I can see it in real time. So what that does to us as humans, and I'm not a psychologist, but in my opinion, is that we live in a state of fear constantly, whether you're an ad exec or, somebody living down the road running a coffee shop. We're constantly scared, subconsciously, of the economy, of social stuff, of politics, of natural disasters, of war. We feel disempowered. We feel that we don't have control. And therefore, this is my full circle, we need to do it now. So can the advertising industry change? Can that kind of growth and marketers change? Yes, but it would take time. And they don't put any value on that time. So therefore, they're going to do what works now. So I'm an optimist. I believe, I'm also just, a follower of where human behavior goes. Of course we can turn this around, and we're seeing it all the time now. It's definitely happening, but it will take time. So maybe the number one skill set we need to master is patience, perhaps.
How do you work on that? Like, what's your personal practice?
With patience.
Yes.
You have to practice patience with patience. I actually think it is the hardest skill for me in this kind of entrepreneurial journey. I talk about three things. I talk about patience, tenacity, and consistency. All right, that's kind of my, formula for like carrying on.
PTT.
Right?
Wait, no.
There we go.
PTC.
No, yes, PTC. I didn't even think of it as an acronym.
Yes, see, we found our what do you call it? Not formula. The thing you were saying you don't do.
Yes, the framework, the equation, right? The framework that HR
I learned about that when I
write.
started speaking. They're like, well, do you have a framework? I'm like, I don't know what that means.
I know. And now I have one, but only because of exactly that, Lauren. Yes. They were like, so can you share the framework? And I was like, sure. So
I just combined things. That's the truth.
Yes.
I took the things I was already talking about and I just put them in a group.
Yes, and put a title, right?
Yeah.
Like earlier last week.
The 6 steps.
The 6 steps, exactly. Last week, I sent someone a pre-read of a deck that I was going to present. And this person wrote back and said, but could you please add just a slide that has like key takeaways, right? And I was like, and so I said, of course, like no problem at all. And then I looked at my deck and I thought, well, that last slide is key takeaways. So I just added the word key takeaways. And then she was like, thanks so much for the changes. And I was like, you're really welcome. Anyway, what were we saying?
Oh, we were talking about how you build patience, and you said PTC.
Oh, I love that you gave an acronym to my thing. Yes. So patience, tenacity, and consistency. And I think you have to, they kind of go in a circle, right? Because in order to keep practicing patience, you have to be very consistent. Because patience, by its definition, as we just spoke about, is slow. And even though I subscribe to this and I believe in this, sometimes you want something a bit fast, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you think, I just spent like an hour on this post and like 28 people saw it. right? Is that really a good use of my time? And even though I'm like anti analytics in that way, you can't help it, right? Because especially as a solopreneur, right? Everything you do costs time, costs money, costs team work. So I think patience is just a continual practice of patience, of reminding yourself. And for me, I have a phrase that I use, and I always say it to myself, which is, this is a 10-year game, not a 10-minute game, right? And I like go to my coffee shop and I tell myself, 10 years, not 10 minutes. And that kind of helps me reset. Often, I think, Lauren, and maybe you see this in your work as well, we have to mentally say things to ourselves to swap the brain, because the conscious mind leads this subconscious. And it is the subconscious mind that's going, you should be quicker, you should have 28,000 likes and not 28, all that stuff, right? Because it's absorbing information all day. So that ability to use words in your head, or you can say them out loud, resets the subconscious. So that's why I say to myself all the time, 10 years, not 10 minutes. It helps. Try it.
It definitely does. I mean, I think that this is a really, really hard, it's hard to unlearn getting your worth outside of yourself in a world that consistently tells you that's where you should look.
I know.
And so it is that when I turned 33, I don't know if you know, but that's like the year Jesus died. But like in the spiritual world, everybody says like 33 is your Jesus year. And so I thought that was going to be a good thing for some reason, even though he was crucified that year. I was like, that's amazing. My Jesus year is going to be amazing. It turns out it was a year of deep spiritual lessons. But the biggest one was realizing, oh, like I could get everything I want and still not be happy, or I couldn't and still not be happy. So I guess I have to stop looking out there and start looking in here. But it is something I have to work on every single day. So I don't think that these things, like patience in the world we live in, is a daily practice. It's not like learned it and now I'm good.
Yeah, it is. It is a daily practice. And that's why I said I have to say it really like consciously to myself. And sometimes, some days it doesn't cross my mind. Some days I'm totally relaxed. I guess as a creative, because I'm extremely right-brained, I'm like, and this is the other reason when people say to me, how do you want to scale? Do you want to scale? And I think, well, I don't even know what scale is really. I just like creating content around empathy. I just like helping people have empathy. That as creators, we put our love, our heart, our soul. I've seen you singing, Lauren, on your Instagram page. To be able to sing that well, you have to mean it, right? To be able to create that. And when someone doesn't respond to whatever that product, that thing is, right? A song, a post, a podcast episode, a video you made, it doesn't matter, a piece of art, right?
Yeah.
When you don't get the recognition, the acknowledgement from something you poured into, it's exhausting. It's demoralizing, but it's also exhausting. So I think that's partly why we're constantly looking for external recognition. And again, back to that point of, social media and just media at large, your competitive set is so huge now. So if you think maybe 50 years ago, if you were an artist in your hometown, probably you were the only one. There may be someone else, but they were probably doing a different type of art. But today, if you're an artist in some small town in, I don't know, Oklahoma, right, your art is on Instagram against the entire world's artists, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be impatient about, right? Because you think, well, why did this similar artist in Paris do better than my Instagram post in Oklahoma? That's not fair, right? My art's better than his art. And the reality is it's not really fair because of algorithms, because of budgets, because of power, because of investment. The playing field is different now than it was when us humans began our journeys. And I think we're still catching up because it's just too fast for us, right? Things change every day. And that just gets faster. It didn't used to be that fast.
Well, all this leads me into the thing I saw on your website that kind of blew me away because I've never heard of this term before. I talk about self-love on this podcast almost every single episode, but I have never heard anybody talk about self-empathy. Can you define what that is and why it matters?
Oh, yes. It's really funny because when I started talking about self-empathy, well, this journey for me is only 4.5 years old. So it's been a relatively short time. And when I started talking about self-empathy, even for me, I was like, what? why do I know what this is and nobody else seems to know what this is, right? As you said, you never heard of it. What's interesting is you hear a lot about self-awareness, self-compassion, many other things, self-kindness, self-love. But for some reason, people don't talk about self-empathy. But if you put that into context for a minute, if you know you're anxious, right? I recognize I am self-aware. I know that I'm an anxious person. If I don't understand why, how am I going to fix it? So self-awareness without self-empathy, understanding, is kind of misplaced. Because to be aware of something but not understand it doesn't help you progress ever, whether that's inward, like you, self-empathy, or empathy in the world. I can be aware that my team in the workplace is underperforming and miserable. But if I never have any empathy to understand why, I can't fix it. So self-empathy is the same thing, but internally, right? Self-empathy is the ability to understand yourself. What drives you? What do you love? What do you not like? Where do you do the best work? For me, Lauren, it took until my 30s as well to be anywhere close to getting this right. And one of those examples to bring it to life is that I don't do well if I'm alone for too long, right? So if I work from home for a week because of, I don't know, my daughter or something, for the first 2 days, I'm like, this is awesome. I can work in my pajamas, right? This is amazing, or whatever I'm wearing. But by day 3, I feel a bit weird. And it always takes me maybe 30 minutes. And I'm like, I've been alone too long. All I need to do is sit in a coffee shop. Literally, 6 minutes into the mall, I'm like, okay, we're good, right? I need to be around people. That is my self-empathy that tells me that. It's my understanding of me. I'm just rubbish on my own. I feed off the energy of other people. And by the way, I'm an introvert and not an extrovert. So that kind of definition that everyone says out there, that introverts get their energy from inside and extroverts get their energy from people. I'm an introvert, but I get my energy from people. So yeah, self-empathy is that ability to understand yourself. And we have 2 forms, inward and outward. Inward is self-empathy, so understanding of yourself that you can solve for. I know I do better work after a run. I know that. I can act on it. I'll go for a run. Outward self-empathy is knowledge of yourself that somebody else has to shift something to impact. That would be you and your fiance. That would be when your fiance said to you, Lauren, I don't feel you are listening and it's making me feel disconnected. Could you try and change your behavior to help me feel better? Outward self-empathy. He understood something about him and then he asked for help from you to solve something for him. So yeah, inward and outward self-empathy.
I love it. So something I talk about on the show a lot is self-knowledge. I am a little confused. What's the difference between self-knowledge and self-empathy? Are they different?
Do you know what? I never heard of self-knowledge, but I think I would say self-empathy is probably deeper, and maybe we're kind of, clutching at straws, because as I said in the very beginning, I think the simplest things in life are always the best. So arguably on the surface, they're probably very similar. But I think probably the difference between knowledge and empathy as concepts is that, and I'm not, a dictionary, but when I hear you, knowledge to me feels very surface level and top. I know that this is a watch. I know that, right? I know it's a watch. It's knowledge. Empathy has depth. Empathy is about understanding. So I know Lauren has a podcast and she talks a lot about the role of creativity in life. But do I understand you, your drivers, your purpose? Well, not yet, because we haven't hung out. So I think self-knowledge is probably closer to awareness. It's, I know that. That's very different from I understand that. That would be my... But listen, I'm talking because I never really thought about self-knowledge before. So I'm talking on the cuff, but I think that feels right.
I think that's interesting. So would you say that's true with empathy too? It's the difference between knowledge and understanding?
Yes, for sure. From an empathy point of view, I think that's true. Again, you can know that someone's unhappy. That doesn't mean you understand. It doesn't mean you've asked, hey, how are you? Do you want to talk about that? Right? It's just the top. It's the top. Knowledge is important, but it's not depth.
So it's the knowing plus the why.
Yeah, the why, exactly, the context. That's why I always say empathy is perspective taking. It's about forming a perspective around why someone in your team is doing worse after their promotion. So you have this great performer in your team and you say, listen, Mimi, you're doing brilliantly. I'm going to promote you. And you expect that that's going to be great and Mimi's going to carry on growing. And then you realize a couple of months later, she's not doing as much as she used to. She doesn't feel as motivated. Like, what? Why? Right? That's your empathy. Knowledge is, I can see she's not doing as well as she was. Empathy is to say, why is she not doing as well as she was? So yeah, I'm making like a T because I'm a visual person, right? Like the knowledge is across the top and the empathy is going down the middle. There we go. We created a new framework.
We gotta add it to the
HR will be
slide.
thrilled. Yeah, the slide is already formed in my head. I might
can
actually make
picture
it
it.
and send it to you.
I'm seeing you pointing to it right now.
Oh, funny.
So for somebody, because inner critic also is a thing that I know really holds people back from pursuing their creative passions. So for somebody who has a really loud, judgmental, or even like a paralyzing inner critic, how can self-empathy soften that voice a little bit?
I think it helps you understand where that critic is coming from. And I had that critic was like my best friend until my early 30s probably. At some point in my late 20s I was living in Hong Kong, and I can remember coming home from a work event one evening. I was probably like 27 or something, and I came home to my tiniest apartment you can imagine in the whole wide world, and my brain, like my anxiety was like going bonkers, right? This critic was like, did you say enough? Maybe you didn't say enough. Maybe they didn't like you. Maybe you never, all that stuff, right? And I remember it was just exhausting. And I can remember that particular occasion, but I think it happened all the time. I think in those years of my life, even though I was doing very well on my career and I had been moved to Hong Kong and I was a senior account director or something, I was like, had some great title in a team and all these things. But I just felt like, maybe it was because I had been promoted so quickly. I've never really thought about this, but maybe I had just moved up so fast that I wasn't able to keep up with what people thought I could do. So that inner critic was really a lot for me then. Self-empathy helps you work out why. What is it that's making me feel like I don't fit in, or that I'm not good enough, or that I'm concerned about this? And again, talking earlier about time, you have to slow down to do that work. For as long as you keep running, you'll keep putting it off and then you'll never understand it. Because it's the same with empathy. I say to people, you can't empathize on, like, when you're running to a coffee shop. You have to stop. Right? Even if it's a short time, people say to me, I don't have time for empathy. You can create empathy in less than 90 seconds, but you still need 90 seconds. Right? You can't do it whilst running. So self-empathy helps you understand that inner critic. There's a reason that it's there. It's based on an experience or a memory or how you were brought up, or maybe for me it was about speed of promotion. I never thought about this before, Lauren, but maybe I've been promoted too fast, right? I couldn't, my confidence couldn't keep up with my performance, maybe. So I didn't have a lot of self-empathy then because I hadn't discovered this work and I was very young. But certainly when I moved into my 30s, that became easier for me. And yeah, by my mid-30s, I had my friend, my critic friend had gone away. He's not always gone. Sometimes it comes back.
Of course. Sometimes they move back in. You just got to be like, all right, you can sit in the
Hi.
trunk, but not in the front seat with me.
Exactly.
You said before I discovered this work, I'm so curious how you did, because I always believe, when I'm coaching someone with creativity or, doing a podcast coaching, I believe the topic we're meant to sit on lays somewhere between our greatest joy and our greatest pain. That it's somewhere in between the two that comes this mission statement of our lives. How did it become empathy for you? Like, what drove you to this work?
So the first thing is that when people ask me, how did you find this purpose? I always say I didn't, because it found me. because I wasn't looking for it, you know. I had no intention of leaving the corporate world or ever leaving advertising. I loved advertising. I don't have like I mean, I have many horror stories of the corporate world, but I don't have like a disaster story of why I left. I just left because I found something I love more. And that was a high bar because I loved my work already. So it found me because I moved to Dubai in 2018 to take over a big American business's regional office. And I had come out of corporate. So I had come out of teams with like big finance teams and big procurement. I was surrounded by people, like people to share business with. And this role saw me all on my own. I went in to run this small business, maybe 40 people. And when I got there, the business was not doing very well, to put it gently, right? And the honest truth, Lauren, I had no idea how to turn it around. I was not an entrepreneur. I'd never run a small business. I'd never been responsible for a P&L other than a client P&L, which is one client, you know, amongst a global business of 50. So at that time, I went to see a coach, like a life coach, a business life coach. And we were having lunch and she was asking me about my leadership style. And at the time, I was talking about intuition, being an intuitive leader. And then she stopped me and she asked me a question that in the end changed my life, because she said, Mimi, is it intuition or is it empathy? And I remember thinking, no way, right? It's not empathy, right? What's empathy got to do with business or me? And today it's funny because obviously I say that word like, 70 times a minute. But then I don't think I'd ever thought about empathy really much ever. But I went away and I started to research it. And I discovered the empathy deficit that we touched on at the very beginning, this lack of connectivity in our world. And I just couldn't believe that nobody was talking about this. There was really, truly, and still today, there's very few. But then, I mean, there was, I don't know, maybe 5 people, all Americans, except for me, in the world talking about empathy. That it just was not a thing. So I thought, well, I'm going to talk about it. I just couldn't understand how something so huge, something that was so clearly, at least to me, pulling apart our workplaces and our world. I found this data set at the time about youth death rates. And I read that the second biggest killer of our youth today, so 14 to 24-year-olds, was no longer vehicle accidents, but suicide. So our children, they have such a lack of belonging that they would rather not stay in the world with us. And I thought, somebody needs to talk about this. So Laura and I did. So I don't remember sort of day one, but I just started to talk about empathy. I started to write. I think for me, right, to work through the challenges of turning this business around, which we did, and it was a happy ending in the end. And once I started, I couldn't stop. And I guess today I'm still going. And about a week ago, we had I said I don't really care about analytics, but it's still interesting sometimes. My team sent me our data for the first 150 days of the year. And we reached 2.5 million people.
Wow.
But I promise you, at this point, I had like 200 connections on LinkedIn. So I just got up every day and started talking about it and hoped that somebody was listening, and they weren't. But I carried on anyway, right? I carried on, and today I get to talk to people like you about it. So it's moving in the right direction.
So beautiful. I do want to ask, because maybe not everybody has the exact career trajectory you have. It sounds very unique. But what people can relate to is the fact that you reinvented yourself. And I know it was kind of natural. It sounds like it was a natural progression. But that still takes some work. When there's a little girl that at 12 years old was like, I am going to become an advertising maven. And you suddenly decide, actually, I'm going to be an empathy expert and talk about this in the world. Did you have to do any inner child work and talk to that 12-year-old girl and let her know, hey, I'm not giving up on this dream. We did this dream to the fullest extent. Now we're going in a new direction. Like, was there any sort of reinvention within yourself that you had to do?
No, I think I'm doing that now. So that's a slightly bigger discussion. But what I would say is, I believe that what's meant for you will come for you. But in order to get there, you have to lean into it. And that means you have to be really open to signs, and back to tenacity that I said earlier. You have to be very tenacious. And I guess another way of saying that is resilient. It's like the trending word right today. So I had to trust the process a lot. And I think probably because I couldn't trust myself, because as I said, I think I'm only doing the work now to really lean into what this could be. I think it's hard. I think it's very hard. And to get your head around, people have been saying to me for like the last 2 years, your personal brand. I'm like, no, I'm not a personal brand. I don't have a personal brand. I'm just talking about empathy, right? I've now kind of accepted it. But see, I have to say the word kind of. I'm still not quite there. Even though there's, all these thousands of people watching and great stages and podcasts and all these amazing things. And I'm very aware of that. I'm very grateful of that. I'm very joyful. I love this, right? I get up every day. I love it. But that like inner work to really step back and say, look what you did, or look what you're doing. I don't think I've done it yet. I still don't think I have the confidence in myself. So that is why I very rarely, you'll see now it's slightly changing, but very rarely talk about myself. My Instagram, until literally, Lauren, like the last 4 weeks, there's no stories, or there used to not be any stories like about me or my life, or even though for years people have been asking me, and every content team I work with is like, hey, could you do something about your life? And I'm like, no.
Could you do something about your life?
I'm like, no, I can only talk about empathy, right? Empathy has to lead, and Mimi will follow, right? I have to, and I think it will always be that way. And I believe that will keep me very down to earth, right? That this isn't about me. It never was about me. It's about empathy. It's about us, actually. So I think that inner work is still going on in order to kind of let go of maybe where I was going and now where I am. Because the other thing I say is, and maybe this is useful for people listening, is I think the media tells us as women to say no a lot, particularly the Western media. And again, I live in the East, and I have been for like 20 years, so I can see the West from outside the West, even though I look like I'm from the West. The Western media and coaches and much of that personal growth rhetoric tells you protect your boundaries, say no, stand up for yourself, charge your value, all good things, right? You should protect yourself and you should charge your value. But if you keep saying no, how are you ever going to grow? So I say yes to everything. And people say, well, then how do you have time? I say, well, I create time. The more I say yes, the more time I seem to have. So that's the other thing that I've been doing for like 4 years now is, unless it doesn't align with my values, unless I feel like this person's exploiting me, or, there's many podcasts, honestly, that I do say no to, because I think, not always by men, but often with men, I think I actually my gut instinct tells me I don't really want to hang out in a room with your energy. I don't think our energy is going to match. Mm-hmm. So say no to what doesn't fit you, but otherwise say yes. And if you don't have the answer, say yes anyway, because by the time it comes, you'll find the answer.
Yeah, I so resonate with that. I mean, yeah, I think there's good parts of what that like whole say no movement did and is doing. But I saw something the other day, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this living in the East, that was like, normalize inconveniencing yourself sometimes to be there for people and show up for people. Boundaries have gotten so out of control in this culture that people now think it's totally fine to never show up for anyone because you're like protecting your energy. And I put that in quotes for those that can't see. And yes, you have to sometimes. Sometimes you do have to choose guilt over resentment, right? Like if you're going to resent someone else for saying yes to it, then choose your own guilt. But sometimes you just have to put yourself aside and show up for people. And I think that that's a really, really important thing to remember. And the other thing I really resonate with what you just said is saying yes. Like I answer my phone still. Call me crazy. I always think, what if it's an opportunity?
Yeah.
You never know. And you never know if you do a podcast and it reaches one person and it changes their life, or they end up hiring you for something, or they end up becoming your friend. Like you just never know. And if it feels warm, even if to your brain it feels crazy, if to your body it feels like a yes, go toward it.
Yeah. And not just because it might be an opportunity, because it might, right?
Yeah.
But because as I said earlier, what's meant for you will come for you. So if it's coming, there's probably a reason, right? Again, if you feel that it's the right one, because we're meant to meet people. We're pro-social, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know, for some weird reason, nobody might listen to this episode, but it doesn't matter because I've still started my day with you. You can see how much I'm loving it. I'm going to leave this and go to my daughter's International Day school party,
Oh,
and I'm going to
fun.
walk into there like, like this has filled my cup, as it were. So I think what you touched on is such an important piece, and I'm working on a new solution for this, which is that the self-help personal growth industry, I feel, has been so focused on me, my, I, that we forgot about the we. And so we have been growing in isolation of each other. And arguably, that is why we have a loneliness deficit, right? An epidemic, actually, of loneliness. According to the World Health Organization, this is very new data, maybe 3 weeks. 900,000 people a year die of loneliness. And 335 million people say they don't have a single friend. Right? 335 million. So, but perhaps as individuals, they're doing very well, or at least on LinkedIn, they look like they are, right? So I think it is such a huge problem for us that we are growing ourselves without the people around us. And I'll tell you one very short story. I know we're probably coming to the end, but I was recently with a phenomenal CEO on this side of the world. I mean, he's worth, I don't know, probably billions. Really, really phenomenally successful man. And we're having coffee in a hotel lobby. And at some point in the conversation, he's talking about something at home, and he talks about upstairs. I say to him, "Do you live in this hotel?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I do. So thanks for coming, it's really convenient." I said, "Oh, okay, so, how long have you lived in this hotel?" He said, "Oh, 5 years." I was like, "Okay. So you've lived here alone for 5 years?" He said, "Yeah, great hotel, blah, blah." Conversation goes on, and in the next maybe 5 minutes, he says to me, "The thing is, I don't have a single friend in this city. All I have is my work, so a hotel is fine." He carried on. He didn't feel the depth of that statement, but I did. So it begs the question, Lauren, what is success? What is personal growth? If you suddenly have all this money and your name is in the newspapers and you are flying in innovation, and yet you're living in a hotel room, eating dinner alone for 5 years without a single friend in the city that you're living in. Is that success? I don't know. I'll leave it open to other people to define, but I think it's questionable.
No. Well, that's why I think our work is so aligned, because I really see this show as a means of approaching creativity in your dreams from a platform of self-love and self-knowledge and self-trust, instead of going after it because you're always looking outside of yourself, but going inside. But what I love about what you're saying, and what I've been feeling more along the past year, is yes, I think that's always going to be your foundation and allow you to show up authentically, but it means nothing if we can't create with each other. And so I really think the thing I would love to leave listeners with is all these great tools we've shared, that Mimi has shared, but also to encourage you all to find your creative community and make things together. Because no matter how it's received by the rest of the world, if we are making things in community and seeing each other, it's going to help you remind yourself of your inherent value as a person, of the creativity you make, and allow you to be that mirror for others too. Yeah. So thank you for that call to action, and just for who you are. I mean, I have to agree with your social media team. Your messages are so powerful, but who you are is the most powerful thing about you. So thank you for sharing some of your story today, and so many amazing tools and frameworks, I might add. Everybody, check out the slideshow. But I just adore you, and I can't wait to meet you in person. And you're just a gift to this world. So thank you for being who you are, and for all of the amazing work you do.
No, thank you. I mean, right back at you. I said at the very beginning, I was super excited to come, and it's been really, really fun. So thank you for allowing me to talk about it, because I want to reconnect the world, and I can only do that by talking to them. So Thank you.
Yes. You made my day. You're the best, Mimi. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and thanks to my guest, Mimi Nicklin. For more info on Mimi, follow her at Mimi Nicklin and visit her website, miminicklin.com. Unleash Your Inner Creative is hosted and executive produced by me, Lauren LoGrasso. It's edited by Blondell Garcon, with theme music by Liz Full. Again, thank you, my sweet creative cutie, for listening. If you like what you heard, rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Also, comment on Spotify. This does make a big difference and pushes us up the algorithm. You could share the show with a friend and post about it on social media. This also really helps us grow. And if you do post on social media, I will repost to share my gratitude. Also, tag the guest at Mimi Nicklin so she can share as well. My wish for you this week is that you practice one small act of empathy, whether that's really listening to someone you love, using someone's name, or extending a little bit more compassion toward yourself. Each moment of empathy brings you closer to your creativity, your community, and your humanity. I love you so much, and I believe in you. Talk with you next week.